A crown bought with lies will eventually crush the head of the man who stole it. England. The wedding of Duke Christopher Blackwood and Lady Clara Voss was the event of the season, which was itself a distinction, given that the season had already produced 3 notable engagements, a diplomatic scandal involving a minor Austrian prince, and a horse race whose outcome was still being disputed in 2 separate gentlemen's clubs. The Blackwood wedding surpassed all of it. The flowers alone required 4 days to arrange. The guest list included 2 cabinet ministers, a bishop, and enough hereditary peers to staff a small country. The cathedral was full before noon, and the street outside it was full an hour before that, with the particular mixture of genuine celebration and strategic positioning that attends occasions at which being seen matters as much as what you are seeing. Clara stood at the cathedral entrance in white silk and her mother's pearls and felt, in the full and uncomplicated way of someone who has not yet been given reason to feel otherwise, that she was the luckiest woman in England. She had believed in the courtship. This was the first thing to understand about her, that she was not naive in the way of women who refuse information, but that the information she had been given was carefully managed, and that she had received it with the trust of someone who had no reason to suspect that the man presenting it had constructed it deliberately and with malice aforethought. Christopher Blackwood had courted her for 4 months with the polished attentiveness of a man whose social survival depended on the performance being convincing, and it had been convincing because he was very good at the performance, and because Clara, who was intelligent and perceptive and fiercely independent in most areas of her life, had wanted it to be real and had given it the benefit of that wanting. She walked down the aisle on her father's arm and looked at Christopher at the altar, handsome, composed, impeccable in the way of men who wear their exteriors like armor, and she felt the particular quality of happiness that belongs to someone at the beginning of something they believe in. She said the words. He slid the diamond onto her finger. The bishop pronounced them. The cathedral erupted in the manner of cathedrals at the conclusion of ceremonies that have gone according to plan, and Clara Blackwood, Duchess of the estate of Ashmore, walked back down the aisle and into the carriage that would take her to her new life. The carriage gates shut behind them with the sound of iron on stone. Christopher looked out the window on his side. He did not look at her. He had not looked at her since the altar. She waited. The journey was 2 hours. She waited through both of them with the patience of someone who assumes there is an explanation and intends to allow it to present itself. He did not offer one. He responded to her conversation with the minimal acknowledgement of a man tolerating a necessary condition of his existence, and when they arrived at the manor, and she turned to him in the entrance hall with the question forming on her face, he said, "Mrs. Aldrin will show you to your rooms. I have correspondence to attend to." He walked away. She stood in the entrance hall of the manor that was now her home, with her mother's pearls at her throat, and the diamond on her finger, and the particular quality of cold that arrives when something you believed in fails to be what it promised. Mrs. Aldrin showed her to a wing of the manor that faced north, with windows that let in the grey light of late autumn, and a fireplace that smoked when the wind was from the east, and furniture that was adequate in the way of furniture selected without care. It was not the Duchess's suite that was in the south wing, sunny and warm and furnished, with the attention of someone who had designed it for someone they intended to please. Mrs. Aldrin, who had been at Ashmore for 20 years and had the expression of a woman who knows a great deal and has decided that most of it is not her affair, said nothing about the discrepancy. She showed Clara the room, the adjacent sitting room, the view of the kitchen garden, and left. Clara stood at the north window and looked at the kitchen garden going brown in the November light and let herself, for the first time since the carriage gates, be fully present in the reality of what she had arrived in. Then she began to pay attention. She paid attention the way she paid attention to everything she considered important, which was with the full, patient, accumulative focus of someone who understands that understanding comes from complete information rather than first impressions. She paid attention to the staff, to what they said and what they did not say, to the way they moved around Christopher's study door and the way they looked at her when they thought she was not looking back. She paid attention to the mail, which came to the manor's front table, and which she had not been instructed to avoid, which she received as permission. She had been at Ashmore for 11 days when the first debt collector appeared. He came to the side door, which suggested he had come before and knew which door to use. Mrs. Aldrin intercepted him. Clara, who had been returning from the kitchen garden where she had begun the small, practical project of learning the estate's actual rather than apparent condition, heard the conversation from around the corner of the corridor and stood still and listened with the quality of attention that does not betray itself. The debt collector's name was Mr. Fenwick. He represented a Mr. Carrow of the city, and the matter concerned a sum of £11,000 outstanding since March, and his previous 3 visits had produced assurances that the matter would be addressed, and the matter had not been addressed, and his instructions were now to proceed to formal proceedings unless payment was received within the barred fortnight. Mrs. Aldrin said she would convey the message. Mr. Fenwick said he hoped she would do so with some urgency. The side door closed. Clara stood in the corridor and looked at the wall and thought about £11,000 and the word outstanding and the word previous and the 3 previous visits that had produced assurances. She went to the estate office, which was unlocked, and she looked at the shelves, and she found the ledgers on the 3rd shelf, and she sat down at the estate office desk and she opened the first one and she began to read. She read for 3 hours. She read with the focused, comprehensive attention of a woman whose father had been a careful man who had taught her his carefulness, who had insisted she understand the accounts from the age of 14 on the grounds that a woman who did not understand money was a woman who could be deprived of it without her knowledge. She read the ledgers and she understood them, and what they told her was this: the Blackwood Duchy was a hollow shell. The estate revenues were committed entirely to debt service. The investments were borrowed against. The liquid assets, which had, 2 months ago, included her dowry of £32,000, were gone. The dowry had been received in September, dispersed in October, and the disbursements were to creditors whose names she did not recognize, and a private account in Christopher's name at a bank she had not known he used. £32,000 gone in 6 weeks, and 11,000 still outstanding with a fortnight's warning before formal proceedings. She closed the ledger. She sat for a moment in the estate office with the information arranged in her mind with the precise, ordered clarity of someone who processes difficult things by understanding them fully rather than by refusing to look. Then she opened the ledger again and began to make notes. Lady Beatrice Harlow arrived at Ashmore on a Thursday morning in the 3rd week of November, in a carriage that was not shabby, wearing a travelling dress that cost more than most people's quarterly income, and she was received at the front door by Christopher himself, who had not come to the front door to receive Clara on any occasion since their arrival. Clara watched from the north wing window. She watched Christopher's posture change when the carriage door opened, the particular softening of a body that has been held carefully and has been given permission to stop. She watched him take Beatrice's hand. She watched Beatrice look up at him with the composed, proprietary warmth of a woman arriving at a place she considers hers and has not conceded. She watched all of this with the clear, cold, comprehensive attention she had been developing since the first night in the north wing, and she placed it alongside the ledgers and Mr. Fenwick and the 3 previous visits, and she thought, there it is. There is the shape of the thing. Beatrice was introduced to the household as the new estate manager, which was a title that explained nothing and implied everything. She was given the rooms in the south wing that Clara had understood were intended for the Duchess. She dined with Christopher. She reviewed the staff arrangements. She made changes to the household schedule without consulting Clara and communicated these changes through Mrs. Aldrin, who delivered them with the expression of a woman performing a task she finds distasteful but considers outside her remit to refuse. Clara received each of these developments with the outward composure of the perfect, submissive wife and the inward attention of someone cataloguing evidence. She was not performing submissiveness for Christopher's benefit. She did not care, at this point, what Christopher believed about her state of mind. She was performing it for the situation's benefit, which was a different calculation entirely. She had understood, with the precision that characterized everything she turned her full mind to, that a woman in her position had exactly one advantage, that no one was paying attention to what she was actually doing because they had decided what she was weeping, helpless, easily managed, and did not intend to revise the assessment. She intended to make thorough use of this. She found the letters in the 4th week, in the drawer of the writing desk in the estate office that had a false bottom she identified because the depth of the drawer, when measured against the exterior of the desk, was insufficient by 3 inches. She had been measuring furniture since the 2nd week because she had decided that if there were hidden things at Ashmore, she intended to find them, and the desk was the place she would have chosen. The letters were between Christopher and Beatrice. They were dated across the past 2 years, and they were comprehensive in the way of letters between people who have been conducting a sustained arrangement and have committed their arrangements to paper with a confidence that suggested they had never seriously contemplated the possibility of being read. Clara read them with the unhurried attention they deserved and learned the following: that Beatrice had been Christopher's primary attachment for 4 years, that the plan to marry Clara had been Beatrice's design, a temporary financial arrangement, her exact phrase, which was also the phrase that most clearly expressed how Clara had been categorized in their accounting, that the dowry had been the target from the beginning, that once the dowry was fully dispersed, which it now was, the next phase of the plan was to be initiated. The next phase was described in the final letter, dated 6 weeks before the wedding. Christopher had expressed some doubt, the only moment of conscience visible in the entire correspondence, a brief, quickly suppressed hesitation about the specific cruelty of the plan's conclusion, and Beatrice had addressed it with the brisk efficiency of someone who has considered every angle and found the hesitation unnecessary. The plan was to accumulate evidence of Clara's instability, her letters being read and selectively misrepresented, her behavior managed toward incidents that could be characterized as erratic. The culmination was to be a petition to the Court of Chancery on grounds of mental incompetence, with enough manufactured evidence to support the petition. Clara would be committed to an asylum. Christopher would be free. Beatrice would be the natural solution to the question of the Duchess vacancy. Clara read this letter. She read it twice, with the full, careful attention it required. Then she found the hidden compartment in Christopher's safe. She had located the safe's position from the correspondence and had been working on its mechanism for 3 days, with the methodical patience of someone who understands that combination locks are a problem of logic rather than force. The compartment behind the main chamber held the contract. It was a legal document, properly witnessed, binding Christopher to Beatrice in terms of title, succession, and estate inheritance, dated 14 months ago, 6 months before his courtship of Clara had begun. She read the contract. She noted the witnesses. She noted the lawyer's name and the clerk's name and the date of the notarization. She placed everything, the letters, the contract, the ledger copies she had made over the preceding weeks, in a leather case she had purchased from the village on the grounds that she needed something for her correspondence, and she took the case to her room in the north wing and placed it in the chest at the foot of her bed, where she kept the things that were hers. Then she sat at the north window and looked at the kitchen garden, which was entirely bare now in the December cold, and she thought about what came next. What came next required 2 things: time, and a room large enough to contain the full accounting of what Christopher and Beatrice had done. She needed a room with an audience that mattered not the servants, not the county, but the assembled weight of the peerage and its institutions, the people for whom Christopher's destruction would be permanent and total, rather than merely local and temporary. She thought about the King's Autumn Gala. She thought about the date, 3 months away. She thought about 3 months of perfect composure, of the submissive wife who causes no trouble and raises no flags, and gives the conspirators no reason to accelerate their timeline. 3 months was sufficient. She had what she needed. She had always been good at patience when patience was the right tool. She began to write letters. The letters went to 3 people. The first was to her father's lawyer, Mr. Pemberton, who was a man of 60 with 40 years of experience in estate law, and the particular quality of a man who has seen enough of the worst of human behavior that very little surprises him and nothing deters him. The letter explained the situation with the precision of a woman who had organized her evidence before she began the explanation, and included a copy of the contract and a summary of the ledger discrepancies. She asked him to prepare the legal case for the recovery of her assets and the annulment of the marriage on grounds of fraud, and to have the documentation ready for presentation at the King's Gala on the 14th of March. She asked him to be discreet. The second letter was to her brother Edward, who was 28, a barrister, and the person in the world who understood her best and would be most capable of the specific task she needed from him, which was to coordinate the delivery of the evidence to the room at the right moment without betraying the plan to anyone who might carry intelligence back to Christopher. The third letter was to Lord Fenwick, the Lord Chief Justice, who had attended her wedding and who had known her father, and who was, she had determined after careful consideration of the available options, the person whose presence at the gala would ensure that the evidence she presented was received as what it was, a legal matter, rather than as what Christopher would attempt to make it, which was the hysterical outburst of an unstable wife. She sent the letters via the village post on a day when Christopher was in London and Beatrice was occupied with estate management that Clara had deliberately made tedious, a strategy of generating paperwork that had been running for 3 weeks and had occupied approximately 40% of Beatrice's available attention without appearing to be anything other than the natural complexity of a large estate. She received 3 replies within the week. All 3 confirmed what she needed. Pemberton would be ready. Edward would be in the room. Lord Fenwick would attend the gala and would understand from Edward that there was a matter requiring his attention. She folded the replies and placed them in the leather case. She went to dinner. She was the perfect, quiet, submissive duchess at dinner. Christopher spoke to her when social necessity required it and ignored her when it did not. Beatrice managed the table with the proprietary ease of a woman who has decided she has already won. Clara ate her soup and thought about March. The weeks between December and March had the quality of a sustained performance in which only one person in the cast knows the script. Clara gave the performance of the season's most compliant victim. She deferred. She withdrew. She allowed Beatrice's incursions into the household management without visible resistance. She responded to Christopher's cold indifference with the meek composure that confirmed his assessment that she had accepted her situation and would continue to accept it. She did all of this with the focused professionalism of an actor who understands that the performance's purpose is entirely separate from the performance itself. She also, in the hours that were unobserved, the early mornings, the North Wing evenings, the times when Christopher was in London and Beatrice was occupied, continued to work. She worked on the legal case with Pemberton via correspondence, refining the documentation and ensuring that every piece of evidence had the chain of custody that would make it incontestable. She worked on the financial recovery, which Pemberton had begun, through the courts on the grounds of fraudulent misrepresentation in the marriage contract. The fact that Christopher had represented himself as financially solvent when he was not was itself grounds for nullity, separate from the hidden engagement contract, and Pemberton had filed the initial claim in January under a procedural heading that did not require Christopher's awareness. She also, in the North Wing evenings, wrote out what she intended to say. She wrote it many times. She wrote the long version and the precise version, and the version that was pure devastation, delivered with complete economy, and she read each version aloud in the empty North Wing sitting room with the critical attention of someone who understands that the words you say in a room full of the British peerage will be remembered and repeated for the rest of the word. Lives of everyone who hears them, and therefore deserve to be exactly right. She arrived at the version that was exactly right in February. She memorized it. She said nothing further about it to anyone. The King's Autumn Gala, so named for the tradition of its October origins, now moved to March for reasons of the King's schedule that had calcified into custom, was held at Hartley Palace, and was, as the most significant social occasion of the year, attended by everyone in England whose attendance at things was considered to mean something: the Prime Minister, the Lord Chief Justice, the diplomatic corps. the assembled peerage in its full and comprehensive weight. 200 people who between them held the opinion-forming authority of the entire country, and who would carry whatever happened in that room into every drawing room and parliamentary chamber and society occasion. For the next 5 years, Christopher had insisted on attending. This was, Clara understood, part of the plan's timeline Beatrice had written to him in January about the necessity of the public appearance, the importance of presenting the image of the Blackwood marriage as stable and functional while the asylum petition was being prepared. The gala as the last public occasion before the plan's conclusion. Clara had read this letter. She had been reading Christopher's correspondence for 2 months with the facility of someone who has learned which drawer he consistently forgets to lock, and had noted the timeline with the interest of someone whose own timeline was 3 weeks ahead of his. She dressed carefully. She wore deep blue, her own dress, from her own money, purchased in London in February, on the grounds of a shopping trip that she had been granted by Christopher, with the indifferent magnanimity of a man who considers his wife's appearance a public relations matter and is willing to fund it at a level that reflects well on him. She wore her mother's pearls. She wore the diamond ring, for the last time, with the conscious awareness of a woman who knows exactly when she will remove it. She was, in the carriage to the palace, entirely composed. Christopher sat on his side of the carriage and did not look at her. Beatrice, who had travelled separately in her own carriage, the fiction of the estate manager, had been stretched to breaking point and had not been repaired, because neither Christopher nor Beatrice considered Clara worth the effort of repairing it for, would be in the room already. Edward would be in the room already. Pemberton's team would be in the ante-room with the document packets. Lord Fenwick would be at the Lord Chief Justice's habitual position near the east wall. Everything was where it needed to be. Clara looked out the carriage window at London, going past in the March evening light, and felt the particular quality of calm that arrives when a decision has been made so completely that there is nothing left to feel about it except the readiness. The gala was at its full, splendid height when they arrived, the chandeliers doing their considerable best, the orchestra in the musicians' gallery playing with the polished competence of people who have performed at royal functions often enough to have made competence a reflex, the room full of silk and broadcloth, and the particular social energy of 200 people who are simultaneously performing and assessing the performances of everyone around them. Christopher moved through the room with the practiced ease of a man at a familiar event greeting, receiving greetings, managing the political geography of who he was seen with and for how long. He was good at this. He was, in fact, at his best in rooms like this, which was perhaps why he had not understood that his best was insufficient to manage Clara, who was a different kind of intelligence in a different kind of room. Beatrice was already there. She was near the east side of the room, with a group of women Clara recognized as her satellites, the people who had confirmed her assessments and amplified her plans, and would now be witnesses to their conclusion from the worst possible vantage point. She caught Christopher's eye briefly, across the room, with the quick, proprietary look of people conducting a coordination. Clara saw this. She catalogued it. She moved through the room in the manner she had maintained for 4 months, composed, quiet, unobtrusive, and she located Edward near the west door and gave him the slight nod that meant the timing was as planned. She located Pemberton's man in the ante-room archway. She found Lord Fenwick at the east wall and did not look at him directly. She found her position in the room. She waited. Christopher was called upon for a toast at 9 o'clock. This was customary at the Blackwood table at such occasions, a tradition of the title that gave him a moment of addressed attention from the room. He took the glass from the footman and turned to the assembled guests with the performance of aristocratic ease that was his most consistent quality. And he began, "My lords, ladies, and distinguished guests, it is my great pleasure, as always, to be among such company at this most. I regret," Clara said, "the very breath I wasted saying I do to you, Christopher." The room stilled. Stilling, in this context, meant 150 conversations ceasing in the span of 2 seconds. the orchestra failing to notice for a bar and a half before they too fell silent, the quality of the air changing in the manner of rooms that have understood that something is happening that they have not seen before and that they intend to witness completely. Clara had moved to the center of the floor. She had not rushed. She had walked with the composed, unhurried certainty of someone who has had 3 months to practice the walk and knows exactly where she is going. She stood in the center of the ballroom floor in her mother's pearls and her deep blue dress, and she looked at Christopher across the room with the level, clear eyes of a woman who has seen everything, understood everything, and decided what to do about it. She raised her hand. She pointed at Christopher's chest, not dramatically, not with the performance of accusation, but with the direct, precise clarity of a woman, indicating a specific thing in a specific location. "You stand here wrapped in velvet," she said, pretending to be a peer of the realm. "But you are nothing more than a bankrupt thief and a coward." Christopher had gone the particular color of a man whose blood has left his face in the efficiency of immediate crisis. He opened his mouth. He produced the sound of a man assembling words in conditions unsuitable for word assembly. "She is," he began, and found unwell and hysterical and distressed, and could not produce any of them because the room was watching with the absolute, comprehensive attention of 200 people who have been waiting for their entire adult lives for an occasion worth this quality of attention, and whatever he said would be received by all of them at once and would be remembered. "She is what?" Clara said, into the silence he had created. Her voice carried without effort. She had practiced the projection too. "Unwell? Distressed? These are the words you have been preparing for 4 months. You will find they are less effective when the evidence has preceded them." She looked at Edward. Edward looked at Pemberton's man. The anteroom doors opened. The packets went into the room with the quiet efficiency of people who have rehearsed a logistical operation and are now executing it. The footman, Pemberton's men, placed in the palace's service for this evening with the cooperation of the Lord Chamberlain, who was Lord Fenwick's cousin and had been made aware of the situation 2 weeks prior, distributed the document packets to the tables nearest the center of the floor, where they would be seen and reached and read by the maximum number of the relevant people. The copies landed on white linen. People picked them up. The room produced the sound of 200 people reading simultaneously, which is its own particular quality of silence, focused, accumulative, the silence of comprehension, arriving. Lord Fenwick, at the east wall, had already received his copy from Edward. He was reading it with the attention of a Lord Chief Justice reading a legal document, which is the most comprehensive form of reading available. Beatrice moved toward the room's exit. She moved with the careful, not quite running speed of someone who has assessed the situation and identified departure as the correct response. The King's Guards, who had been positioned at the exits 40 minutes ago with the cooperation of the Lord Chamberlain, stepped forward. They were courteous. They were immovable. Beatrice stopped. Christopher looked at the packets on the tables. He looked at the people reading them. He looked at Clara in the center of the floor with the level eyes and the mother's pearls and the deep blue dress. And he understood, in the way that understanding arrives when it can no longer be avoided, that the plan he had designed with such careful patience had been running, for the past 3 months, inside a different plan entirely. "The evidence before you," Clara said, addressing the room rather than Christopher now, because the room was the point, had always been the point, includes a legal contract binding the Duke of Blackwood to Lady Beatrice Harlow in matters of title, succession, and estate inheritance, signed 14 months ago, 6 months before his courtship of me began. It includes his correspondence with Lady Harlow detailing the purpose of our marriage, which was the acquisition of my dowry of £32,000 to service his debts. It includes the ledger records of that dowry's disbursement, and it includes the plan for my subsequent disposal, which was commitment to the Bethlehem Royal Hospital on manufactured grounds of mental incompetence. The room received this. It received it the way rooms receive information that is both enormous and entirely credible. In the complete silence of 200 people, simultaneously revising their understanding of an event they thought they had already, "Understood." "Lord Fenwick," Clara said. "Your Grace," Lord Fenwick said. "From the east wall, already moving." She turned to Christopher. She looked at him for the last time, with the full, clear, unhurried attention she had developed over 4 months of living in a house that had been designed to diminish her, and she felt nothing particular, not triumph, not grief, not the performance of either. She felt the clean, completed quality of a thing that has been done correctly. She reached to her left hand. She removed the diamond ring, the massive ring he had slid onto her finger in the cathedral, while she felt like the luckiest woman in England, the ring that had been the opening gesture of a performance designed entirely to harm her. She held it for a moment, feeling its weight. She dropped it. It fell through the air and landed at Christopher's feet on the ballroom marble, with the small, definitive sound of a thing being returned to its owner. "You wanted my fortune to save your dying name," she said. "You can keep the hollow crown, Christopher. The courts have already begun the process of returning my assets, and the law will take the rest." She turned. She walked toward the ballroom doors, which the footman opened without being asked, as if the building itself had understood what was happening and was cooperating. The room parted for her with the particular quality of parting that crowds extend to someone who has just done something that will be discussed for the rest of their lives. She did not look back. There was nothing behind her worth looking at. The aftermath had the quality of conclusions that have been properly set up and therefore proceed without requiring management. Christopher was taken into custody by the Lord Chief Justice's authority that evening on the grounds of the fraudulent marriage contract and the documented misrepresentation of financial status in a marriage settlement, both of which constituted offences under existing statutes that Pemberton had spent 3 months identifying and documenting. The formal proceedings began in April and concluded in May with the outcome that the evidence had always made inevitable. Beatrice was charged separately as a co-conspirator in the fraud, and the evidence of her participation, her letters, her design of the asylum plan in her own handwriting was sufficient to ensure that the charge held. Her family's considerable legal resources produced a sentence lighter than Pemberton would have preferred, but the reputational destruction was total and permanent, which in the world they had all inhabited was its own variety of life sentence. The marriage was annulled on grounds of fraud. Clara's assets were returned in full, with the interest that Pemberton had insisted on, including in the recovery order, and the judge had sustained. The estate of Ashmore, stripped of the debts that had been fraudulently incurred, reverted to the Crown, which disposed of it with the bureaucratic efficiency of an institution that has been managing awkward inheritances for 500 years and has developed a procedure for everything. The diamond ring was not returned. Its disposition was not recorded in any document Clara considered worth reviewing. She went home to her father's house in the spring not as a defeat, not as a return, but as the claiming of the life that had been hers before the cathedral and the carriage gates and the north wing and the 4 months of perfect, careful patience. She walked into the entrance hall and her father was there, and he looked at her with the expression of a man who has been informed of what his daughter did in a room with 200 witnesses and has not yet found the words for what he feels about it. She said, "I'm home." He said, "Yes, you are." And then he said nothing further for a moment, and then, "Pemberton tells me the interest clause alone." "I know," she said. "I wrote the clause." He looked at her. He had always known what she was, had been the one who taught her the accounts, who insisted she understand money, who had said, when she was 14, and frustrated by the limitations of what was considered appropriate for her to know, that a woman who did not understand her own resources was a woman who could be taken from without her awareness. "Your mother would have been very pleased," he said. "I know," she said again. "She taught me to pay attention." She went in. The house was warm and familiar around her. Outside, the London spring was doing its determined, argumentative best against the last of the March cold. She sat in the library and looked at the walls of books her father had accumulated over 50 years, and she thought about Christopher and Beatrice in their respective legal proceedings, and she felt, with the completeness of someone who has finished a thing properly, nothing in particular about either of them. They had been a problem to be solved, and they had been solved, and the solving was done, and they were no longer her concern. She thought about what came next. She thought about it with the open, clear attention of someone who has survived the worst available version of the world and has arrived on the other side of it knowing, with considerably more certainty than before, what she was capable of and what she would not accept, and what she intended to build with what she had. She had her fortune. She had her mind, which had proven itself under conditions specifically designed to defeat it. She had the pearl earrings and the deep blue dress, and the memory of the ring falling through the air and landing on marble, and the sound of it, small and definitive and entirely correct. She had, as it turned out, everything she needed. She had always had everything she needed. The past 8 months had been, among other things, a comprehensive demonstration of this fact. She opened the nearest book. The library was warm. The spring was doing its work outside. She was home, and she was free, and she was entirely, completely, irreversibly herself. Julian Ashby, who had been at the gala, in the second row of witnesses when Clara dropped the ring and walked out, told the story for the next 20 years at dinner parties across England. He told it in the way that people tell stories they were present for and cannot stop being present for in memory. And he never varied a single detail, and when people asked him what the most extraordinary thing he had ever witnessed in London society was, he told it again, and the detail he always returned to, the one he always said last, before the silence that followed the end of it, was this: she didn't run. She walked. She walked the same way she had walked in, straight through, head up, entirely certain, and the room gave her the aisle. The whole room gave her the aisle without anyone being asked. 200 people in the most formal setting in England, and they just parted, the way water parts. Because they understood, I think. They understood what they were looking at. He would pause there, and then he would say, with the expression of a man who has been trying for 20 years to find the right word and has settled on this one. She was magnificent. Dear listener, we closed tonight with Clara in her father's library, with the spring outside and the books around her, and the completeness of a woman who has come through the worst of it and arrived, on the other side, entirely herself. Clara's story is not a love story in the conventional sense. It is a story about a different kind of love, the love of a woman for her own intelligence, her own resources, her own capacity to survive and then to act. The love of a woman who was handed a trap and turned it inside out. She did not weep. This is not because she was unfeeling. She felt it all. The wedding joy and the carriage gates and the north wing cold and the ledger pages and the letter about the asylum. She felt every piece of it. She simply understood, with the precision her father had given her and her mother had confirmed, and 4 months of cold rooms had made absolute, that feeling and acting are separate functions, and that the moment she confused them was the moment her opponents gained the advantage. She did not give them the advantage. The ring falling on the marble, that sound, small and definitive and entirely without drama, which is the sound that real endings make, not the orchestrated, not the announced, but the simple, accurate placement of a thing back where it belongs. Christopher and Beatrice designed a trap. They designed it with patience and intelligence and the confidence of people who have always been the most dangerous people in their rooms. What they did not design for was a woman who was more patient, more intelligent, and more dangerous than either of them, and who did not announce any of it until the moment she had chosen. May you have her patience. May you have her clarity. And if someone hands you a trap, may you have the presence of mind to study it carefully before you decide what to do with it, because the same mechanism that catches can, with the right understanding, release. May you walk out of every room that doesn't deserve you with your head up and your pearls on. May the room give you the aisle. With all our gratitude, legends of the fall. One more thing worth saying, before the night settles. The north wing is the detail that stays with you, not the gala, not the ring on the marble, not the packets of evidence landing on white linen, though all of these are memorable in their own right. The north wing is the beginning of everything, and it is the most honest part of the story. Christopher put her in the north wing because he did not intend her to be comfortable. He put her there because discomfort was useful to his plan. A woman who is cold and isolated and confused is a woman who is easier to manage, easier to dismiss, easier to eventually commit to an asylum on grounds of instability. The north wing was a tool. He had selected it with the same calculated precision with which he had selected her dowry and her family's good reputation, and her genuine desire to believe that the man courting her was what he appeared to be. What he had not calculated was that a woman put in a cold wing with a smoking fireplace and inadequate furniture, and the deliberate withdrawal of her husband's regard, would spend her time, not weeping, but working, that she would measure the furniture, that she would read the ledgers, that she would find the false bottom in the desk drawer and the combination of the safe, that she would write 3 letters and receive 3 replies and spend 3 months building, in the drafty, isolated wing of a manor designed to diminish her, the most comprehensive legal case the King's Gala had ever witnessed.